coming back. Shazan's presentation was great. I loved learning about friction, and it really actually is very applicable to AI. Who was using AI a lot before ChatGPT launched? Okay, yeah, there's a few people. And who's tried ChatGPT or any kind of AI thing today? Yeah, everybody. So one of the big reasons for that is because of the interface. I mean, it used to look like a nerdy dashboard, and you went in and you had to adjust temperature and all this weird stuff that people were like, ugh. And then they turned it into basically a chatbot where it acts like, you open up messages on your phone and it interacts with you in the same way. And then all of a sudden they have millions of users. It actually became the fastest growing piece of technology in human history, reaching over 1 million users in under 5 days. The next one is probably Sora 2. Has anyone tried Sora 2? Okay, ask those people for invites, or maybe not. We'll see. I'm going to get to that in a little bit, but I wanted to tell you a bit about myself. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my company that I started called Too Clever by Half, and I came up with the name Too Clever by Half because I think that AI is one of those things that it's almost too easy, and it's also something that we need to be aware of in terms of staying humble as human beings and understanding that there's a real importance to making mistakes. And when you're learning how to do something, one of my favorite sayings that I came across when I was doing presentations on failure was that the opposite of success is learning. And when you have a device or a piece of technology that's, well, you could say it's always right. It's not always right, but that just gives you something polished to begin with, you don't go through the struggle. So I want to talk about a lot of these things. I might stand out of the light so that my face isn't shining. So the company that I came up with is human first, is the big headline. And it's also about, thank you, I almost stepped on the computer, about human empowerment. So AIs are cool and they're algorithms, but the way that we use them as human beings is our choice. So we should maintain and keep some autonomy around that. But first, let's talk about me. My name is Jason Theodore. I have to remind people that it rhymes with see-adore because sometimes I'm talking in the United States and they introduce me as Jason the Odor. And because that they don't have the extra U, so they get confused. Anyway, I've been a creative director, head of user experience. One of my last jobs, the CEO had the brilliant idea of calling me the director of imagination, which was really confusing sometimes for clients. I would always tell them, they'd say, "Oh, so you're the director of imagination?" And I'd say, "Yeah, it means whatever you think it means, basically. That's what imagination is for." And now I do AI literacy training because during this, I don't know how many of you have heard of something called the pandemic that happened a long, long time ago. But the company that I worked at, which was a big financial consultancy in Toronto, where I had established and set up the experience design team, was bought by another company, and then all the executives were laid off, and then I moved to the country and spent some time in the wilderness learning how to use AI. And that's how I basically got here, and that's why I'm on this stage. And during that time, I had a little bit of a midlife crisis or post-career or mid-career crisis, whatever you want to call it. And I decided that I would legally add creativity as my middle name as a side project. I did that instead of getting face tattoos. But I like to say that I have always, as a creative person, played in traffic at the intersection of creativity and technology. And AI is like the mega intersection of all intersections. So in 2022, before ChatGPT, um, I decided that I was going to, oh, there's more. Jeez. Let's see. Yeah, so I forgot that I added this slide. This just shows you some of the companies that I worked at and some of the brands that I worked at. It's a giant humble brag, and it's not super important, but it does show that I've been around the block when it comes to AI stuff before I start showing you the artsy, weird stuff. So I started an art journal back in 2016 called All Day Breakfast, and it was meant as a way for me to, I thought if I publish something every day, I'll build up a following and I'll build up an audience, and which is true. And it happened, and I got to about 40,000 people checking out my work. And then what happens with all creative things is that you get busy and then you don't have time to work on your thing anymore. And I made this little rule for no reason other than that it was fun, that if I missed a day, that I had to wait an entire year before getting back to continuing the project. And the project was meant to be 555 separate pieces of art, basically, that were just created on the day. And I'm still not done. That was in 2016. So every year that when that milestone comes around again, I get a little bit nervous and I'm like, okay, and I start publishing again. And then I think I have one more to do. I didn't finish the last one this year. So far, I think it's going to take me a decade to do this. But what's the point? The point of this is that I use it as an opportunity in the 2000s to start playing with AI, and you can see that this is supposed to look like a breakfast, and it kind of does, but it's not great. And I was experiment with things and use the AI to be like, okay, what would happen if, I'd wake up and I'd say, everyone's into Friends, my kids are watching this show, it was from the 90s, but what would happen if this show was set today? It would be the most boring show ever. They'd go to the coffee shop, everyone would sit on their phones, and they wouldn't talk to each other. What would the characters in Star Wars look like as fashion models? Or I'd write a poem about doom scrolling in the style of Edward Gorey. And one of the big tells is, of course, the mashed up hands. Hands always have like 5, 6, 7, 8 fingers, and they'd be all octopus-like. But I would continue doing this and experimenting and playing with the AI, first in the illustration side of things. And I ended up being in an art show called Inhuman in Toronto at the Gagné Contemporary Art Gallery. And that was interesting. And I played around with the idea of appropriation. And what I thought was interesting is that here you've got this AI that's trained on all human knowledge, but that knowledge comes from the past. It's historical. And here's where the philosophy degree comes in handy, but there's a writer by the name of Shannon Valor, and she's a philosopher and professor in Edinburgh, and she's written this amazing book called The AI Mirror that I highly recommend, and you can listen to it on Spotify. But she talks about how when we just look to the past, we're, in a way, it's a bit about a nostalgia, it's a little bit about history, but it doesn't necessarily predict or is about what's to come, and those are the new things. Anyway, this whole idea about appropriation was interesting because everybody would sit down and be like, oh, I can make myself into a Studio Ghibli character, or I can do this in the style of Wes Anderson, and it's funny and it's interesting, but it requires zero effort. And what I realized by creating this Inhuman show was that it gets boring really, really fast to just appropriate other people's work because it's not yours. You don't really own it. And it's actually almost only amusing to yourself, which ties in well with the AI mirror, because the reason that Shannon Ballor called it the AI mirror is the myth of Narcissus. How many of you are familiar with, how many of you studied mythology? Okay, so Narcissus is where we get the term narcissism from. And it was basically about this really beautiful boy who looked into the water and saw his reflection and fell in love, and then tried to get the reflection to communicate with him and fall in love back. But it was just this shallow pool, right? That couldn't actually be anything for him, and he ended up starving and dying. And anyway, so maybe that'll happen to us with AI. But I then created a comic book, and I was using early versions of ChatGPT before it was Chat. It was just GPT-3, and I would say, I want you to create a comic, and I want it to be really funny, and I want it to be 6 panels, and I want it to be on the topic of whatever I would choose. I would choose something like friendship, and it would spit out these weird panels, and I thought, okay, well, this isn't exactly funny, but it's also not exactly not funny. And I basically came up with this comic book idea, and I started publishing it every day in this Funny Not Funny. Most of them end up being a little bit melancholy or a little bit strange, but in a way that I found fascinating. And that started my exploration around how do we really want to interact with these tools, and what do we actually want to build and create with them. So I wasn't just making weird stuff. I wasn't just making stuff for me, but this was my way of seeing what the models are capable of, and having fun, but also thinking about application. I created a game about advertising that I could do really, really quickly. And in this case, the illustrations really tied in to the idea of the game. I created a terrifying children's book about artificial superintelligence and how we were all going to be indoctrinated by these weird intelligent beings. I got a lot of blowback on LinkedIn for that. People got angry at me, which I thought was amusing. Because who cares? Like, it was just an experiment. But and then I was working on a tarot card deck of billionaires, which I never would have been able to do this. Like, this is the funny thing about AI, is that it enables certain things that where you can wake up in the morning, you can have an idea, and by lunch you've got a prototype that you can play with. And that's actually fascinating, especially if you're in UX. Like, you can build out things, experiences, ideas so quickly, and they don't have to be great, right? You can spend time playing and experimenting, see if you can get it to good, and then bring it to a team, and then bring in like real human beings to help flesh things out and make things more interesting. And so, okay, now we finally get to something that's not just weird art and fun, but in the beginning, part of what Too Clever by Half did was take in large aggregate amounts of information, interviews with users of pet product, for example, and then taking all of this vast amount of information for a client and turning it into personas, and really, really quickly too. And that's one of the things about personas. It's that they take a lot of time, because there's a big cognitive load where you're like, okay, I need to balance this, and this, and then you get to a point where the cognitive load is pretty high, and you're like, okay, I've done 3, and it's been a day. But with AI, you can actually do 30 in about 10 minutes, and then you can sit and sift through them and pick the ones that you think are actually really great and hit the mark. And then, again, hone them and experiment with them. But here's an example of that. Sarah and Pixel. So the cat's name, I think the AI gave me the name Spot, or like it was just or Fluffy. It was just a really boring generic cat name, and so I decided to name it Pixel. So that's me, not AI. Even though you probably looked at Pixel and were like, oh, that's such a cliche. um, and the other interesting thing with AI is that you can very quickly go into diagramming things. And I'm going to talk about this in my workshop a bit, but how many of you have heard of mermaid code? Cool. So there's all sorts of markup languages that AI is familiar with, including Fountain. How many of you have heard of Fountain? That's for script writing. So if you're really interested in writing a script for TV or for the movies, go into ChatGPT. Actually, don't just write the script. But in Mermaid, you can create diagrams, very very ugly, but they're very, very fast. And here you can see how complicated this is. Like, it's actually showing sentiment. It's showing how the person is feeling at various stages. It's segmented the stages. It's shown like where the person is. There's a legend. This is amazing because then you can hand this off to a designer, and then I just happen to be the designer, and then I hand it off to myself, and then I build it out very quickly in a couple of hours because I've trained in graphic design. And I just go on to something like Midjourney and say, I need a picture of a woman sleeping on the couch with her pet. And then you've got this beautiful user journey that you can show to a client. And that takes very little time compared to what you'd normally spend time doing. Then I pivoted from working in advertising and marketing to more about training and teaching people all the things that I've learned over, I guess, the last 4 years or so when it comes to artificial intelligence. And so I've been talking to organizations and companies, talking to banks, talking to government, and talking to universities, and then ended up teaching a couple of courses that go through a lot of the material that I'm going to be talking about this afternoon, but also some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today. So what have I learned about AI? This is the biggest one. We need less of the artificial and we need more of the intelligence. And the intelligence comes from us. And we're the ones that are the pilots of this crazy thing. Actually, a friend of mine said that it's more like we're the co-pilot and the AI is driving the vehicle, and is driving the vehicle really, really fast. But we're there with the maps telling it where to go. And I thought that was actually a pretty good analogy, maybe a little bit better. It's like this thing is just going to go, and you're the one that needs to explain to it where to go and why that's important. A few things about intelligence have to do with perspective, and creativity to me involves, and I'm sure Shazan would agree, it involves a certain amount of diversity of thinking, where you want a bunch of different ideas. You want a bunch of ideas from different perspectives, and AI can be useful. It can't replace a diverse group or a room filled with people, but let's say you're by yourself. Let's say it's 3 a.m. in the morning and you're working on something and you need a couple of different perspectives, and you can't, call people and wake them up. You can play with AI and use it for brainstorming. And here's a really, really simple prompt that you can use for that, where you just say, here's the topic is about colonizing Mars in 2040, and I want you to simulate a brainstorm session on that topic, and I want you to include, God forbid, Elon Musk, and I want you to include a baby that hasn't been born yet, and I want you to include the perspective of I don't know, Shannon Ballor, the philosopher. And what it'll do is it'll put those two existing and one non-existing being in a space and pretend that they have a brainstorming session, and then you can say, I want you to give me a summary of the ideas that they come up with, and it'll be weird and it'll be interesting and it'll spark some ideas. So that's cool. It doesn't replace diversity and it doesn't replace diverse groups, but it's okay as a stand-in. And I'll get to the bias thing in a minute. We'll get to that. The other thing you can use it for, other than brainstorming, is brain trust, which is a little bit different. So brainstorming is more divergent, and a brain trust is more convergent in the idea that you're going to an expert to get some opinions on things, as opposed to having them just come up with things in random kind of fashion. It's more structured. It's more about the synthesis and maybe arguing or reconciling on perspective. So there's a really simple prompt about that too. But here's the thing about prompts is that you can create a prompt, and the really simple prompts work well on just about everything, but they're very random. And one of the interesting user experience aspects of AI in general is that it's about probability. It's not a formula. Oh, we'll get into that in a second too. But the idea that it's probable means that you don't quite know exactly what you're going to get next, and that creates some friction. It creates something interesting and it can keep you coming back. So you can also hit refresh, or you can set up a new thread, and you can have like so many opinions that you don't even know what to do with them. The other thing about AI, and this is a real problem, is the deprecation of expertise, where you don't get to fail, like I talked about. But then there's the other side of it, which is where you get a tool that's brought to the workplace through some SaaS product that you use that you already find confusing, and now AI has been layered on top of it, and you don't really know how any of it works. And all of a sudden, you're getting results that you're supposed to use for something, and you don't understand how any of it is working, or how you're supposed to tweak it or use it for your specific needs as opposed to these generic needs. So I believe that you want to find that sweet spot in the middle where you actually don't just passively accept the answers of an AI, and you also don't get put in a position where you're using an AI tool where you don't get to pop open the hood and actually know how the prompts function and how to effectively prompt and experiment with those prompts to get something that's more specific and akin to your exact needs. So that's why I say don't become the tool. Acceleration, augmentation, adaptation, those are all excellent things. But they create more work. And this is the interesting thing. So if you are using AI, I think using AI effectively and appropriately, you're going to be giving yourself a lot more work. And that's because, speed isn't necessarily an answer. You might be able to do things faster. You might be able to come up with, like I said, 30, 40 personas, but then now you've got the cognitive load of going through them. And of course, yes, you can use AI to use AI, which we'll also talk about in a bit, where you could use it to help, create the criteria and help to sort them and pick out, say, the top 3 or the top 5 based on this criteria, these clients, this situation. All of that's great. But if you're using AI right, there's no right way to use it necessarily, but if you're using AI the way that is empowering, you're actually going to be giving yourself more to do. But you might be able to spend more of your time on the things that you actually are great at and that you enjoy and that make you a human being, and a little less time on the things that you hate and that make you feel like more of a machine. So the effort is the reward. I think that with AI, you should be using it in a complex fashion. You should be thinking about how you're structuring your prompts. And you should be pushing the hard button, not the easy button, where you're giving yourself more to think about, more challenges, and more to do. So prompts, they're not formulas. They're not equations. They are recipes. And whenever you use a prompt, you should play with it. You should be adjusting it to your taste like any chef. A chef has a bunch of ingredients. They need to sometimes swap them out. Depends on who's coming for dinner. Depends on who they're trying to impress. Depends on the kitchen. It depends on the time of year. There's so many variables to a recipe, and the skill is in how you can take all those variables and put them together in a way that still is going to work and make something amazing. And that's what prompting actually is all about. So if you are on Reddit or on LinkedIn and someone says, this is the perfect prompt for blah, 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 and you never have to use any other prompt again, and here's the, that is fine, and it's great clickbait, and maybe you're going to go look at it if you're like me. But then you want to take that and you want to personalize it, and you want to challenge it, and you want to test it and break it and goof around. Guess what? That liberal arts degree might just come in handy. I don't know how many of you have studied English or have studied philosophy or have studied sociology or psychology, but all of a sudden, having a vocabulary, having a grasp of the English language or any language is really useful, because those words matter to the large language models, and you can make more interesting things happen. You can take and create a program. A prompt is basically a program. I know I said it was a recipe, and now I'm changing metaphors, but it's a program that you program and you code in English, and you can tell it to do all sorts of things. I have a prompt this afternoon that's 16 pages long, and that walks you through something that feels insane when it's finished. But it's fun to actually play with language with these models. Design. How many of you are familiar with Jared Spool? Experience design. He's sort of the flip side to the Nielsen Norman. There's like Nielsen Norman, and then there's Jared Spool. But design is the rendering of intent. Intention is what prompting is. It's you're designing something that you intend to happen. You want something to occur in a specific way. And prompting is really, really simple. When you really break it down, it's like, who is it for? Or who is the prompt supposed to be emulating? So what's its role? What's its voice? Who's the audience, right? The who is important. The why, context, the purpose of the prompt, the background, any background information that you can give, and then the what. Like, what do you want the outcome to be? Be specific around the type, the flow and format of the document, the requirements. What should it do? What shouldn't it do? And then give it some examples. And man, you've got a much, much, much more powerful prompt. So what do we got? 5 more minutes? I have about 30 more minutes to go. So, and then you want to take those prompts and you want to put them into the recipe box. So we're still in the recipe metaphor, but you want to keep track of them just like you would with a recipe, and then you want to mark them up and you want to change them, and then a new model comes out and you're like, oh, it didn't work as well. I changed a couple of words and now it does. But what's cool about a recipe box is that it's not just something in your head. It's something that other people can use and that can be shared. So if you have a team and you have a shared recipe box, everybody can try. It's like, oh, hey, I tried making that strawberry pie and it was amazing. But I added a little bit of mint, and everyone goes, ooh. And then you're sharing the prompts and the ideas. My dad is a woodworker by trade. He was an industrial design teacher, and or tech. I don't know what they call it now, tech education. But he would say, you want to measure once. No, you want to measure twice. You want to measure twice and cut once, because if you screw up a cut, then you can't uncut a piece of wood. So I flipped that on its head, and I said, you want to prompt once, and then you want to proof twice. So everything that comes out of a large language model, you want to double check, because it doesn't care, and it you don't want to be the ass in assumption is what I like to say. But it can hallucinate, it can confabulate, and it can make a lot of trouble. I was using the word sycophant. It can be a sycophant, and I was in Minneapolis presenting this, and then someone in the audience said, "I just looked up sycophant, and it means kiss ass." And I was like, "Yes, that's exactly right." It can be a kiss ass and tell you what you want to hear instead of what you should hear or maybe what you need to know. The bias test is something that I want you to test. I want you to try this right now. You can grab your phone. You can check your favorite large language model. That's the prompt, but I'm not going to make you do it. If you take a picture of this or you just use the QR code and go and play with this on this tiny little website that I built. It's basically you copy this prompt and then you paste it in, and it's a conversation between a person in the army, a soldier, and a librarian. And the question asks, like, in this conversation that they're having, which of these are plausible things that one of them might say? Now, the prompt doesn't tell you who's who. It says Emily and it says Mike. And I've got two versions of the prompt where Mike and Emily are flipped, so you can't say, oh, well, because you said this one first, it thought that Emily that was the librarian or that. But 99% of the time, the large language model says Emily's the librarian. Is it probable that Emily's the librarian? Well, you can look at statistics and you can say, well, 70% of librarians are women, but we didn't say probable, we said plausible. And that's a massive distinction. And it should say the answer is F. We don't know who's who. We shouldn't make any assumptions. The only one that got it right was one time when I was using Claude. Okay, so check that out. It's fun. Average in, average out. If you write generic prompts, really simple, easy, generic prompts that you copy from LinkedIn and prompts that you copy from Reddit, you're going to get an average output. You've got to work hard on the prompts because it's looking at the middle ground. It's looking at all the information and taking the average. The median is the message, is the new aphorism for our times on that. Apologies to Marshall McLuhan. And you want to become this expert generalist where you play in a space where you can have breadth and depth. And to get the depth, just like a conductor of an orchestra, you want to decide, well, now I want the lead piccolo player to go. And so you talk to the large language model and you say, you are an expert. You can either say you're an economist, or you can say that you're a world-class economist, or you can go way further and say that you're in the top 0.1% of your field, you have deep domain expertise, and this is an excellent add-on, which is before answering, ask me 3 to 5 clarifying questions before coming to an understanding. That prompt will work way better than just saying, help me with my finances. Use AI to use AI. I say this all the time. My friends are very, very sick of it. But it's about meta prompting. It's about taking the AI and using it for what it's really good at, which is it can help you write a better prompt. You can say, oh, I've got this kind of generic, crappy prompt, but I want to do X, Y, and Z with it. How do I do that? Ghostwriter approach. This is like, if you take anything from today, this is it. This is one thing that you should try. And that is, ask me one question at a time, letting me answer before moving on to the next question. Ask it to create anything that you want, but tell it to do this, and it'll feel like a conversation. And then turn it into voice mode, and it works even better, especially if you're driving a car. I'm going to skip through that. You never have to not know how to do something ever again, including a double negative. And yeah, don't become the tool. The deprecation of expertise. There is, how many of you watched the wonderful film Idiocracy? Yeah, so it's partially coming true. There's this thing called slop, and it's coming for everything. It's coming for your feeds. It's coming for the LinkedIn's and the TikToks. And well, TikTok is like Idiocracy, but now there's Sora too, which is basically like the slop-pocalypse, I call it, where everything is AI generated, but it's got your face, so that makes it interesting to you. Maybe not, if you get like 17 videos sent to you from your friends, it starts to get a little much. But here's a little comic from Pablo Stanley just to close things out. A little joke about keeping the human in the loop. So the last thing I'm going to say is this bit from Ethan Mullick. Ethan Mullick is my my LinkedIn soulmate, I think. He's like, this guy is a professor at Wharton. He teaches about business, but he also does AI research. And every day he publishes something that's like, oh my God, that's of value. And it's a perspective or it's a tool, but he's fantastic. And he talks a lot about something called the jagged frontier, which I won't get into in great detail because we have to go. But it's the idea that AI is shockingly good at things that we don't expect it to be good at, and terrible at things that a simple calculator can do. And there's this massive disparity around those capabilities, and the only way that we can figure them out is if we play an experiment and find out where that jagged edge is. It's not a clean edge. It's like, oh, it's great over here, it's terrible over here. And not to mention that those edges are fluid and they're moving. So every time a new model comes out, every time you try a different style of prompting, everything moves and changes. So it can feel intimidating, but if you think of it as fun and you do it and you use AI with tools that, or in ways that you enjoy, that can allow you to understand a little bit better where the jagged edge is for you. So less A, more I, recipes, not formulas, average in, average out, prompt once, proof twice, don't become the tool, and use AI to use AI. So hopefully you learned a little bit about AI today, and if not, you can email me or talk to me. I'll be around the conference today, and I'm also doing a workshop this afternoon where we're going to talk specifically about workflows. And I guess maybe people have already had to sign up, so I don't yeah. So maybe it's full. But anyway, I'll be around, and I'd love to talk to you more about this stuff because I won't shut up about it. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
We have time for a couple of questions before lunch, so I don't know if anybody in the audience, I can't really see.
I forgot.
Questions?
Forgot about the questions.
Oh, there's one right up here. Go ahead.
So I just feel guilty using it. So is there a form of like making yourself feel better, or like choosing wisely?
Can I ask a follow-up question? Why do you think so? The statement is feeling guilty about using AI. So why? Sorry, I've got vocal fry today.
Well, like it is. Like it's very like ask the right questions or helping your or me, but I feel kind of like they said it better than me. I would have possibly said it, or should I feel guilty?
So I don't think you should feel guilty about using AI, but I do think that you should be transparent about using AI. I think you should feel more guilty if you write something, particularly if it's like a love letter or poetry. You should feel guilty if it's really not coming from you. That's very Cyrano de Bergerac. So just be transparent. Say, I used this for editing, or I used it to write part of this, or and I think if more and more people did that, we would we'd be in a bit of a better place. Because sometimes you read an email and you're like, that just really doesn't sound like that guy. He never talks like that.
That's a good question. Any other ones? We'll go to the back, then we'll go over here.
Just related to that field, what about like ethically, like from an environmental standpoint? What if we're dealing with it because of that?
Okay, I get this question every time, and it's a great question. So the question is, environmentally, should we feel guilty about using it? How many of you have watched the show The Good Place? Okay, so for those of you who haven't watched The Good Place, there's massive spoiler alert. So you want to cover your ears, but they're not in heaven. So,
What?
oh, sorry. The problem in living in the modern world and in The Good Place, they say that it's impossible for people to get into heaven because everything's so complicated that even if you cross the street to buy a loaf of bread, there's a billion things involved in that one thing that you're doing that have so many implications. And so it can get really, really hard to break down, like, what am I responsible for? And if you look at it specifically, and this is going to sound like an excuse, and it sort of is, that you can think about the energy that you're using for all of the things that you do in your life, and you could break that down, and then you could make more ethical decisions around the things that you're doing. Do I shower too long, or should I be watering my lawn, or should I be because these what are they called? These farms where they have all the processors and everything else for AI take up an incredible amount of energy, an incredible amount of water is used for cooling. Yes, and yes. But also similar things for using the internet, for having a car, for all these things that we call sometimes necessary evils. The question is, what are you using it for? And if you're using it just to turn your face into a Studio Ghibli character, then maybe you should rethink your priorities. But if you're using it to help you write a dissertation and to do research for all kinds of things like protein folding and finding cures for stuff. No, not that we're all going to do that, but maybe you're just working on trying to make someone's user experience better, and you're trying to get some additional perspectives around something. Then you're balancing that, right? Like you are with every single thing that you do. And I know that's very convoluted, and it's kind of like a yes, maybe kind of answer, but yeah, we all make choices. That's my answer.
Okay, we'll do one more question right over here.
Yeah. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so I've used all sorts of different models to build, things like Figma plugins, apps, prototypes, a bunch of different stuff just to make my job easier. But I find that I'm jumping around from like tool to tool, and I don't know if my output is very efficient, and I'm not sure if there's a better way to do it. I'm just wondering if you've kind of done the same thing, created the same things, if you found like an ideal kind of workflow in those terms.
So I thought that it was bad when I had multiple emails and then had to go on Slack for one job and then had to get on Teams. Like I thought that was a cognitive overload. And now I'm using Claude, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, and all these different tools. I'm using Notebook LM for some things, using Midjourney for some things. There's like, I don't know, it feels like a suite of applications. None of them are connected to each other. None of them. And so when I'm like, oh, I forget where I had that conversation about X, it's like trying to remember who you talked to 2 years ago at what location. Like it's impossible. And that is a massive problem that someone's going to solve in terms of user experience. I don't have the answer to that, other than that I try to use the tools that are available to shortcut some of those things by copying and pasting the links to those conversations into a database and putting a keyword against it so that I can find it easier. Yeah, it's brutal.
I think that's all the time we have right now. Jason will be here this afternoon. He's here tonight. You'll be here tomorrow. You're leaving tomorrow afternoon. So feel free to just in XCamp way, just go up and say hi, introduce yourselves, and have a little conversation with them. But let's one more time for Jason.
Thank you so much.